Hey guys, we're Jake and James from Inverted Reality, and you're watching Boss Fight, the podcast on hard mode. Today, we're giving a salute to our favorite captain, Crunch.
Yeah, Captain Crunch. I'm excited.
Crunchitize me, Captain.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited. Not necessarily just about that intro, but about talking about this in general. So,
I was excited for
if you
breakfast
didn't
tomorrow,
notice,
personally. Now that we've talked about it.
oh, dude, that does sound good. I might get me some cereal when we're done. If you didn't know, Red Dead Redemption 2 just came out a few days ago. And it is great. But along with every great video game comes crunch, it seems like. So if you don't know what crunch is, essentially it is a time near the end of the development cycle when everyone involved with the game seemingly works just every day, like 10-hour days to try and get it done. And Rockstar, being as big as they are, is no exception to that rule.
Yeah, they've always kind of been a big, I don't want to say proponent of it, because officially they're not going to sit there and tell you that they want it. But they're kind of well known for it, both back in the original Red Dead Redemption with Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 and with this one. The big reason that this is even a conversation is because, there's been a ton of articles and interviews and stuff with Red Dead's devs and stuff as things are coming down to the wire. It released on October 26th, and about 3 weeks before the game came out, is an article in New York Magazine. Not something you would normally see a video game article published in, but the Dan Houser, which is one of the head guys at Rockstar Games, he described working 100-hour weeks to get the game out the door. He just kind of set it off the cuff. He said it and kind of moved on, and no one really questioned it. Turns out a lot of people were unhappy with that because that's not a really great work condition. If you're doing the math at home, that would be 12 hours a day, 8 days a week, plus another 4 hours. If you're curious, that's not enough time. So 100-hour week is absolutely insane. So he then clarified in an email sent to Kotaku that he was only referring to the writing team, and it was only for like 3 weeks. So yeah, obviously that's okay then, right? Because there's only some people.
Still not fun.
Yeah.
That's just one of the things that, like, different teams have different amounts of work they do. So like your writing team, they're going to be done first because they have to be done in order to make the game.
Right.
So your writing team gets done and they might crunch to like hit a certain deadline to like release it to the rest of the team. So like the guys that need to record, voice acting with all those guys, and then the guys that need to make the towns, all that stuff has to be done by the writing team first. So they obviously want to rush to get done.
Right.
But then it gets to art teams and audio teams and quality testing teams, and everyone has their own version of crunch. And it's one of those things that an interview that Jason Schreier, so we're referencing a lot of this from a Kotaku article. So Jason Schreier over at Kotaku.com. I'll link it in the notes below. It's really good. It's really long. If you get the time, go read it.
Oh my gosh, it's so long. I had to spend all day reading it. I'd like quit my job and stuff just to have time to read this thing. It's insane.
I had to crunch to finish my work. He did an interview with the CD Projekt Red CEO, whose name I'm not going to try to disgrace by trying to say it.
Yep.
But he describes crunch as a necessary evil. So it's one of those things that happens to every video game. And anyone I've ever heard from the video game industry, development industry specifically, is like, yeah, it's crunch. And so we know around this time, a few months leading up to launch, we're going to be working long hours, probably end up sleeping at the office a few times, and that's just what it's going to be. And so having played Red Dead Redemption, it's phenomenal. It's done really well, and we expected nothing less from a studio with the pedigree of Rockstar. But it's one of those things like, is this always going to be a thing, or are we going to start seeing the turn from crunch, especially like in these big studios? In my mind, it'll be easier to get rid of because they have more money. Like crunch to like just doing better planning.
No, I mean, I think
like, all right, we're going to take a longer development cycle to not crunch on a game.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a huge topic in general. When we're talking about this, he opens for this specific article is like, does the company behind Grand Theft Auto 5, the most lucrative video game of all time? Keep in mind, it made almost $6 billion and is still going. $6 billion for a video game. Yeah. Does this company overwork its employees? How much unpaid overtime went into Red Dead 2? Is crunch required to make games with this scope and scale? And is this going to be a massive commercial success? And what's their culture really like? So Rockstar is very much a very secretive company. Not a lot of people know what it's like behind bars over there. So this account that he puts together, we're not going to go through all of it, but it's with 34 current and 43 former employees over phone calls and emails and texts. Rockstars, after all this kind of big hubbub came out, Rockstars went to their employees and said that they were allowed to speak to journalists as long as they gave HR a heads up. But almost everybody that came forward to Kotaku said that they feared retaliation for being candid about their negative experiences, and almost everybody requested anonymity, which is not a great sign to start with.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, and other people that were on the opposite side of the fence said people would think we were just lying and saying we had good experiences because we didn't want to get fired.
Right.
So
And
it was both sides of the argument, but it still was like, I'd rather remain anonymous because I don't want my boss to think any different of me.
Some of the things that stuck out to me with these were like, it wasn't, no one ever specific, like in a lot of cases, people didn't specifically say it was mandatory, but you were frowned upon, you were looked down on, you were maybe passed over for promotions and things like that. If you left when you felt you needed to at that 45 hour mark, you felt like you were letting the team down. There was just this sense of negativity around it, very much like an encouraged 80-hour work week, because they can't just say that you have to do it. But a lot of the sentiment from these interviews stuff, some of them weren't, some of them were perfectly fine with it and say that's normal and that they love the competition and stuff like that, and they clearly are, those would be single people that don't have families, that don't have anything to go home to. But a lot of them were like, no, it's expected and you have to do it if you want to keep your job. Because the big thing in the industry, I think, is finding a way in, because everybody wants to work on video games and there's tons of places to go. You could do IT support, you could do design, you could do art, you could do voice work, you could do graphic, you could do so many different things you can do. So there's a lot of jobs out there, but there's a lot of people that want to do it, especially with how big of a boom it's been in over the last 10 years. So the biggest thing that you have to do is get in and get your name stamped on something that does well. And if you can get in and do Red Dead Redemption 2 and put that on your resume, you're set for the rest of your career. You can ride that out. But how long do you have to get through the mud to get there? Are you this game, for example, was announced and went into production back in 2011. That was 7 years ago. This has been in development for 7 years. One of the examples is there was a town in the city, I think it was called New Bordeaux.
New Bordeaux.
That ended up having that name in another game. So they had to go back and
Mafia 3.
Yeah, and so they had to go back and rewrite the script. They had to re-record all the voice lines. They had to redo all the graphics for it. And so that could be a 6-month pushback because they were in development for 7 years. And
yeah, because it's one of those things, like, you don't just get to go back and like change the name on the sign on the city. Like, it's anytime it's referenced by anyone ever. Like, if Dutch mentions it passively, like, oh yeah, that so-and-so's down in New Bordeaux, it's just like, nope, we got to go back and re-record that line. And anytime somebody, like a random NPC in the town, just says, oh yeah, I got this over in New Bordeaux, it's nope, that town doesn't exist. It's called something else. So you got to go through and take that out or re-record that line.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I mean,
a lot of work.
And they're even like, there was the very first we've heard of Rockstar's crunch culture was 9 years ago, January 2010. Anonymous author published a letter claiming to be from a group of wives of Rockstar San Diego. Criticized the studio for forcing staff to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week for the very first Red Dead Redemption. They kind of waved it off as random people. That wasn't a real story. A couple years later, they did L.A. Noire. People don't always remember that. Max Payne 3 was Rockstar. And
no one remembers that because no one played it.
It was bad. But so there was big crunch time for that. Bonuses are a pretty big deal at Rockstar Games. If the game does well, you do well. But, some of them didn't.
Makes sense.
One of the changes that they made...
Max Payne did not do well, so nobody got... people got really small bonuses for that one.
Right. One of the changes that they made a few years ago, and it's in here if you want the specific dates, but they took their studios, instead of each studio working at a different thing, they started putting all the studios to work on the same thing, the same project. So the idea was that they could relieve some of the bottleneck in some processes of their development. Having everybody work on it, you get more people on it, everybody has to spend less hours. But apparently that's not the case. So there's plenty of examples in here if you really want to dig into how bad or bad they aren't, Rockstar is as a company. But it's pretty clear, ton of crunch in this game. Maybe for weeks, probably for months, maybe even the last year or two.
I saw a thing in there that said about 6 to 9 months was like how much they were crunching
That's
on
insane.
getting this game out.
That's insane. Like really,
can you imagine 9
about
months of 90-hour weeks, 80
It's
80
brutal.
hour weeks?
Like even if you're a single person, if you're talking 80 hours a week, that's 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and then a couple extra somewhere else. So the 1 day a week you have to rest, like, so your social life is gone because you're exhausted all the time.
Yep.
You're working all the time, and then that's 6 to 9 months. So you can't build relationships, you can't do all this stuff. You're probably going to end up depressed. A lot of people talked about that in this article.
We're talking about taking on drinking as a habit,
right? Exactly. And so it sucks that that's the culture that they have created. Now the question is, do other developers do that? How many people put out games in this scale? If we think about new IPs from big companies, it makes me think of Horizon Zero Dawn. What's the culture at Guerrilla Games like? That's not even based in the US, so work conditions are much different overseas, right? So what's the difference? We don't really know. You'd think that there's going to be crunch, but what does that look like? What does it look like at Sony Santa Monica with God of War? What does it look like with Insomniac Games with Spider-Man? Like, we just don't know, but you got to think there's something like this everywhere, right?
Yeah. It seems like something people always talk about, and there's part of it that makes me wonder, like, is it just this thing that it's like, oh, it's always been this way, so that's how we do it, or is it one of the things that really needs to happen? Like, without it, you don't get a game. So it's one of those things like, oh yeah, everybody does crunch, and that's just, you kind of pay your dues in working in the video game industry by being at a studio that has crunch times.
Yeah.
And one of the big things about this and why people bring it up is because a lot of this overtime is for salaried workers. So if you don't work on salary, you don't know. But if you're salary, you don't get paid overtime.
Right.
Like, they say, here's how much money you're going to get this year. There you go.
Yep.
Now,
in
can
theory,
work 2 hours, or you can work 30 hours in a week, and you're going to get that same amount of money because that's how much they're going to pay you.
Yeah. Now, in theory, they should, when you're working that much consistent overtime, they should give you more money. That's how it should work. But there's nothing in it to say
bonuses come in.
that they have to. So that's frustrating. And I think there's not really a good answer here, and it's more just because we just want to talk about it because it's interesting. I think crunch sucks, and I think that they need to find ways around it. And I think 80 to 100-hour weeks, whether or not they were happening for that 6 to 9 months, maybe longer, I think that's unacceptable. And is that the only way to do it? Maybe, because they had 2 internal delays. They had 2 public delays for this game. This game was supposed to be out 2+ years ago, and it took them that long, and they still had to crunch for like a year to get to this point. So what are they doing wrong that's causing that? Or are they just lazy? Is this a lazy response to say, like, oh, well, we could hire more people, or we could just make our people work harder and not have to spend any more money? How much, what is it here in this case? So that's the question in my mind.
Yeah, I think I had heard a stat somewhere, and I might be misquoting that, but for one person at the average game studio, it costs like $10,000 per person per month to make a game. So I'd imagine at Rockstar those numbers are pretty on the nose, and that's not like those people aren't making $10,000 a month. It's like, that's like benefits they get, that's their salary, that's like what it costs to have that person own a computer and any accompanying software. That goes, like, it'd be like everything that goes into a person doing that job is accounted for in that cost. So you have a team of hundreds of people at Rockstar. You got to imagine they're shelling out hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in trying to make this kind of game. You do that over 7 years. Like, boy, what took so long? I know this game is huge, like, right? So it's one of those things, like, I just wonder if there's better planning that could go into it. And like, one of the things, like, out of the gate in this article, they talk about a change that seems small, but it's not. It's adding black bars to the cinematics.
Right.
So when you go into a cutscene, it goes from being full screen to having like the black bars as you used to seeing in movies. And it looks great, and it's the right choice. But the problem is, in something like this, it adds weeks to the schedule. Like the Hauser brothers came in and they were like, I think the black bars would look really good for cinematics. And it's just like, well, they've already shot it for no black bars.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to go through and everything has to be changed. Like it's not a small thing to do. It's hard to do in like regular live video. And that's actually a relatively fast process where you can just kind of like grab everything and like shift it around. But you know, I can't imagine what it takes in a 65-hour campaign.
Yeah.
In a 90-minute movie, you're looking at hours. In a 65-minute campaign, you're probably looking at, again, you're looking at weeks.
Right.
And so, like, yes, it might be the right decision, but, you know, is it worth an extra 2 months of work?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just how it goes. And that's not just like weeks to one person's schedule. This is like multiple departments within a company, because these things are not put together by it's not one person doing this scene, another doing this scene.
There's probably not editor.
You're probably talking about dozens of people that have now added 300 to 400 hours of work to their week just because you want to make one change. And that's this, you know, black bars on cinematics. That's a pretty big deal. So maybe it's not like that for every change.
No,
but it's one of those things. So it sucks because you can't raise a family like that. Like imagine, I don't know if it was this article or the Eurogamer one, where they talk about the time that you're missing with your family. Like you can't get back that first words you heard your kids say or the first steps that he took. It's like, well, I missed it because I was working 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. for 6 months straight. Like that's the problem that I think I have with it. And I don't think video games are the only thing to blame. The $10,000 number you came up with is from a Kotaku article, Jason Schreier back in September of last year, when he was doing his Blood, Sweat, and Pixels book. That he came up with that number.
Good book, by the way,
with his developers. And but I mean, these games cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. Films are the same way. It's not quite as big, but you got to think about Infinity War. Costs hundreds of $millions, and they're not working 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Maybe the actors are, but you've got editors and stuff that are on a very
even then, like
strict time thing. But they have unions.
Yeah, like in the movie industry, like if you kind of like watch behind the scenes stuff, you'll notice like sometimes you'll see like, oh yeah, we're starting at 6 a.m. today, and the reason they do that is because I don't know if it's SAG or one of the many film industry unions requires 12 hours from end to beginning. So they work 6 a.m. to end of shoot day, and then they wait 12 hours. So the next day they start at like 8 a.m. The next day they start at noon, and the next day they start even later till eventually they're doing night shoots. And so you just keep pushing back your start times to keep allowing for people to rest and sleep. And this is actually even one of those things that gets talked about in the film industry when it comes to like paying your dues. Like, oh, everybody does crunch. So that's just one of those things you do. You work at a big studio, you do crunch, and then you can go work at whatever studio you want, and you don't have to do crunch there because you can kind of work at your own pace and you can do better planning because it's not there's not orders coming down on high from the Hauser brothers saying we want to do this. It's like, no, we're all working together as a team to make this game the way we want it, and we agree on decisions on what takes time and what doesn't. In the film industry, that comes with like crew being first forced to work overtime. So some, guys from back when, the old school guys in the film industry, like, oh, everybody works overtime. You pay your dues until you get higher up and you're working on the big movies. And when they say we're working overtime, you just say no. And that's kind of like making a turn where people will be like, no, I shouldn't have to work, 16 when I'm getting paid for 12. And at 12, I'm leaving. And that to me, and like makes sense. It's like, no, I shouldn't need to do this. Plan your movie better. Like, plan your shots better. Plan all this stuff. It's different when, like, okay, an unforeseen circumstance comes up and we had to fix it. Yeah, I'll stay an extra hour or two because we didn't know that, this support was going to fail. But when it comes to, like, video games, it's like, no, I shouldn't have to work 12-hour days for weeks and weeks on end. It's like, okay, if we need to take a week and I need to work an extra 4 or 5 hours, that, yeah, that sucks. But, so make sure I have a day off and make sure that my next week isn't like that.
Yeah. So I think the question then becomes like, how do you fix this? And it's one of those things that this industry has grown so fast. I think it has outgrown what you would normally do. But like we mentioned it a little bit with the movie industry, but like SAG, Screen Actors Guild. I'm sure you've got very similar unions and stuff for the different people that work in it if they're not screen actors. So there's all sorts of things that can protect them. There's stuff in regular industries, like in construction industries and hands-on type stuff like that. There's plenty of it. So now it's like, how soon do we start to see unions get into game workers? There's a big movement right now it's a grassroots organization of people called Game Workers Unite. It was a pretty big deal at the Gaming Developers Conference this year, back in March. Kotaku's put some articles out about it. It kind of came up around when Telltale news was coming out, and they have some issues with their environment that no longer exists now. But it's stuff like that. Like, I think that the only real option is because there's no advocate for these workers. It's just, if you want to work on games, you have to do this, whether it's a little or a lot. You're going to have to crunch for 100 hours, whether it's for a month, whether it's for 6 months. If you want to do well in this industry, you have to do it. And I think we need somebody somewhere to be able to step up and say enough is enough, and somehow make the industry, respond to that. So
yeah,
that's what I'd like to see.
I think they'll have to start at a big studio like Rockstar, right? So
yeah,
if people had done a walkout, if the guys, I'm trying to think of a small studio, if the people that made Limbo, if they had done a walkout for that game, no one would have known. It's like, okay, those guys just don't, that game doesn't get made, that game doesn't get finished.
Right.
And it's hard, like, if that happens at a place like Rockstar, it's like, oh yeah, Rockstar New York did a walkout. Okay, cool. There's hundreds of people waiting to work at Rockstar. Come on in, guys.
Yeah.
Because there's no union. And so,
Right.
and that's kind of what makes it hard. But we're going to need to probably wrap it there, because this is meant to be our short form podcast.
I know. I'm just like, I'm super, like, the more that I read about it, the more it, like, super frustrates me. Because, I mean, I work in IT.
Yeah.
And so I see burnout and stuff like that in my industry, and I'm not part of a union, and that's not really where I'm at. But I have bosses and stuff that advocate for, the mental health of your workers and keeping an eye on your shifts and stuff. And they're very particular. Like, if you're going to work over 45 hours, you need to let like 3 different people know. You need to get it approved. You need to get it signed off. And then you need to only do it once in a while. It's not because they don't want to pay you, which, I mean, they kind of don't want to pay you overtime because it's expensive, but they also know how much it can burn you out. And so I work in IT, and I maybe could hit 50 hours, if I tried really hard to. Like, I'm very solid on my schedule, but even when I have weeks like those, it's exhausting. So something like this, and it being your expectation of your life, like, it's no wonder that people are fed up and frustrated with it. So, man.
Talk to people that work in those kind of industries. Like, I work in production, like, live production, and not where I work now. It's very much like, hey, when the end of the day hits, my boss is walking around to find me and my other coworker being like, hey guys, go home. Yeah. Like, very much taking care of us. But when I worked in, corporate entertainment production, it's like, oh yeah, we're the guys, those are the people that make those jokes. It's like, oh, you worked 40 hours a week. I remember my first part-time job.
Right.
Like, those guys work as much as humanly possible to make money, and they're all just very cranky and tired and frustrated. So I can only imagine what it's like to do that for years on end.
Yep.
But that's going to do it for us, guys. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Be sure to head over to secondinvite.com. Check it out. We got tons of creators on there making out great stuff. So check it out, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.